Happy Monday, Steelers Nation. Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and today we are breaking down every single player that the Pittsburgh Steelers met both formally and informally that we know of at the NFL Combine this past weekend. Before we get into the content this morning, go ahead and click that subscribe button if you haven't already for daily Steelers draft coverage. We're going to be having more draft coverage, breaking down the latest mock drafts around the National Football League media and who they have the Steelers taking in round one later on the Steelers Talk live show starting at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time later today. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button right now and join us at 5:30 for more Steelers coverage. All right, now let's get into why this matters and why we're even talking about why, this is important for Steelers fans to know. The reason is because the Steelers, at least traditionally, really care about these formal meetings and, they really care about taking the steps to really get to know these players, especially if they're going to be taking them in the early rounds of the NFL draft. Usually the Steelers want to meet with them formally at the Combine. They want to have a pre-draft visit. They want the head coach, Mike Tomlin, and GM Omar Khan to go to their pro day. All that stuff, they want to hit every step along the way if they want to take that player in the first round of the NFL draft. So if there's a player out there that did not meet with the Steelers at the Combine, that certainly hurts their chances of being taken in the first round by this football team. Now, keep in mind, these are only the meetings that we know about at this point. So it's certainly possible that the Steelers met with some players that we do not know about. So those players obviously would count towards the first round discussion here. But it's worth noting here the players that we know that the Steelers did meet with. So let's start with the quarterbacks here, and they only met with four that we know of. Jackson Dart, Will Howard, and Quinn Ewers all reportedly had formal meetings with the Steelers, so it certainly seems like Pittsburgh is looking at a mid-round quarterback option of some sort. Max Brosmer from Minnesota had an informal meeting, and then another possibility that could have met with the Steelers, but we don't know, is Louisville quarterback Tyler Shuck. When he was asked this week which teams he met with, he declined to answer that question at the podium. So we just don't know which teams Shuck ended up a meeting with. But personally, I hope Shuck is on Pittsburgh's radar. If they're looking to take a quarterback in the mid-rounds of the NFL draft, I think Tyler Shuck is their best option. He is a little bit older, all right, a lot older. In fact, he's 26 years old next year, and he's dealt with some pretty serious injuries throughout his college career. A shoulder injury that was pretty major, a couple of lower body injuries that were pretty severe as well. So the medicals is going to be what's important for Tyler Shuck in terms of where he goes in the draft. But I think his film is pretty darn good, all right? I think if he was 22 years old and, he didn't have the injury history, I think he'd be a first-round pick this year. He's got the size you look for. The arm talent is there. Got a super quick release with clean mechanics, very consistent accuracy to all levels of the field. He brings some good athleticism to the table. He showed that with a 4.6 40 time. I think it was 4.63 40 time at the Combine this past weekend. Also, the mental processing is really great with really, really good anticipation. The ball placement, he knows what shoulder to put the ball in. There's just a lot to like about Tyler Shuck's film, and if the Steelers are going to take a quarterback on day two, Shuck would be my preference. Then we get to the running backs, and this is certainly going to be a position of interest for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. They met with 8 running backs formally. Here's the list. Ashton Jeanty from Boise State, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, Quinshon Judkins, and Travion Henderson from the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, Jordan James, DJ Giddings, and Jaden Blue are kind of the later round guys that round out that list. And then the informal running back meetings, Omarion Hampton, it's unclear if Hampton's was a formal or an informal. Dylan Sampson, and then Kyle, I'm going to butcher this, but Munaghy out of Rutgers. Both of those guys were confirmed informal meetings. So personally, I hope that Omarion Hampton had a formal meeting. He's certainly somebody that I think should be on the Steelers' radar. And I do expect Pittsburgh to make this a priority early in the NFL draft. You look at all the guys that they're talking to, Judkins, Jeanty, Hampton, all these guys are expected to go in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. Round 3 at the very latest for somebody like a Quinshon Judkins or Caleb Johnson, for example. But I do think the Steelers are going to be making this a priority on day 1 or day 2 of the NFL draft because plain and simply, guys, this is an offense led by Arthur Smith that wants to be run heavy. And in order to really justify having a run-heavy offense in the NFL, you got to have a star quality running back. So the Steelers are going to be looking for their star in the backfield this draft class. Now let me know down there in the comments section, when should the Steelers pull the trigger on that running back? Should it be in round 1, type 1? Should it be on day 2 in rounds 2 through 3, type 2? Or should it be day 3, that's rounds 4 through 7? This will be the pinned comment on today's show, so YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. When that happens, take advantage of that time. But let me know which day you think the Steelers should take a running back. Let me get to wide receiver here, and it certainly seems to me like the Steelers are going to be looking at receiver relatively early as well. The 5 players that they had formal meetings with, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, who ran a 4.29, by the way, absolute burner, Elike Maynor out of Stanford, Trey Harris, and Torrey Horton. All those guys are expected to be gone by day 2. By the way, keep your eye on Torrey Horton. He is a very kind of under-the-radar, bigger receiver that's actually really good after the catch as well. Then the informal wide receiver meetings here, Jack Besh out of TCU, who they met with at the Senior Bowl, Xavier Restrepo, same thing. Jordan Watkins, Trayshawn Holden, Ricky White III, Andrew Armstrong, and then Savion Williams. But something that's interesting about Savion is that apparently a couple of teams asked Savion in the meetings this week if he'd be interested in playing as a running back. And I think with Williams' ability to really make people miss out in space, the size he brings to the table, honestly, he's not the best receiver in the world in terms of route running, in terms of his ball skills. I actually think Savion could make a transition to running back very easily if the Steelers are interested in making that kind of move. I think that wide receiver is probably going to be a big priority early in the NFL draft as well. I think that the Steelers have acknowledged that they need to really address the playmaking positions on offense. They need to add at wide receiver. They need to add at running back, and I fully expect them to do that this offseason. Then the only tight end formal meeting was Penn State tight end Tyler Warren. Now, I don't think the Steelers are going to be particularly interested in taking Warren in round 1. I kind of doubt that they end up taking him because they do have Pat Freiermuth, right? So, and they have Darnell Washington, who they really feel like is a big piece of this offense as well. So I don't really see them taking Warren in round 1, but he did have a formal meeting with the team this week. And then the informal tight end meetings. I mean, this is, to me, when I look at all these names, there's Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, and this kind of looks like the cast of like Bridgerton, all right? Bryson Nesbitt, Gavin Bartholomew, James Brenningstool. Are you kidding me, man? Like, are all these guys from freaking Britain or something? I don't know, but these are all later round guys, day 3. Maybe the Steelers think about taking one of these guys in round 7 or something like that, or maybe an undrafted free agent. But a lot of informal tight end meetings this week for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I really doubt that tight end is much of a priority. Obviously, like we talked about, you have Muth, you have Darnell, they like Connor Hayward, they've got the tight ends that they like in this room, and I kind of don't think they're really going to spend much draft capital improving this group. Then the offensive line's kind of same thing here. Not a lot of high-end players that they ended up interviewing. They did have informal meetings with Gray Zabel and Tate Rutledge, 2 players that are probably going to be guards in the National Football League, and those are good players, but I kind of doubt the Steelers will take an offensive lineman early just because they've got other needs that they need to take care of, and they do believe in their offensive line. Broderick Jones, Isaac Seumalo, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, and Troy Fautano. I do expect those 5 to be the starting O-linemen. Doesn't mean they won't take an offensive lineman maybe on day 3 to kind of bolster up the depth of this group. But I do think the Steelers have their starting 5 already in-house. So I don't think that there will be much of a focus on the offensive linemen, if I'm being completely honest with you guys. Like we talked about, I think that the Steelers believe in their young offensive line that they've already made their draft investment in over the last several seasons. And I kind of feel like, the offensive lineman's not going to be a priority. So next, we'll be on to the defense. There is still one more position that I think is really on the Steelers' radar early in the NFL draft on the defensive side of the ball. We'll get to that here in just a second. But first, let's have word from our sponsor here at Fanatics. And if you guys want to still keep your ears warm throughout the rest of the colder months in Pittsburgh or wherever you are living, and you also want to rep your favorite team before spring begins, you guys can go chatsports.com/beanie. Get this awesome, stylish, and affordable Steelers beanie from our friends at Fanatics today. Also, it helps out the channel. If you guys want to help us get a little bit more money here to buy new equipment, to improve our graphics, all that stuff. Fanatics sends us part of the proceeds for every purchase that you make. So right now, this is on sale. So if you guys want a nice Steelers hat right now, you can go chatsports.com/beanie to get it in your closet today. The position that I was talking about earlier that is going to be a priority for the Steelers in the early rounds is going to be defensive line, specifically interior defensive line. Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, the big boy. Derek Harmon out of Oregon says he models his game after Cam Hayward, Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M, Alfred Collins, and Vernon Broughton out of Texas, J.J. Peegs out of Ole Miss, C.J. West out of Indiana. Both of those guys are nose tackles, run stuffers with informal meetings. Then you had Warren Brinson, Elijah Roberts, and Fred Stokes Jr. Also rounding out the informal meetings. But the top 5 guys there, those are players that the Steelers certainly have on their radar. And I'd expect defensive tackle early and maybe even again later, double dip later in the later rounds. The reason for this, guys, is obviously Cam Hayward's not getting any younger, and Larry Ogunjobi, I do expect to probably get cut at some point during this offseason. So I think the Steelers are absolutely going to be trying to replenish this group. Also, keep in mind that Omar Khan and Andy Weidel come from the Howie Roseman school of roster building. And if you know anything about the Eagles and Howie Roseman, he loves to build the trenches, all right? So with the offensive line pretty much already set for the Steelers for 2025, at least in their view, I do think defensive tackle is definitely a position to keep your eye on in round 1. Then we get to the edges here and the outside linebackers. Obviously, Steelers have TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig, so they're probably not going to be super interested in this position. Lots of guys that are probably going to be going, maybe UDFAs, maybe late, 7th round type picks. But they did talk with Jordan Birch out of Oregon, who is going to be a little bit higher on most people's list. So I think that Pittsburgh has handled that edge. I think we all understand that. With the star talent that the Pittsburgh Steelers have at this position, doesn't really make sense to spend draft capital at this position. Then we get to the inside linebacker positions here. Danny Stutzman out of Oklahoma is the only off-ball linebacker that is probably going to go relatively early, that got a formal meeting. Then everybody else, I like Chris Paul out of Ole Miss. I like Cody Simon out of Ohio State, and I like Cody Lindenberg out of Minnesota, but those guys had informal meetings. So I think the Steelers might be looking for maybe an early day 3 type of inside linebacker. We'll see what they do in free agency. Obviously, they have Patrick Queen, and then they're going to have Peyton Wilson on the other side of them. Those are your 2 starters, but you still need people to rotate in, whether they bring back a Landon Roberts, whether they bring in somebody else in free agency, or they get somebody along the lines of like a Cody Lindenberg or Cody Simon or Chris Paul or any of these guys that they talked to at the Combine is going to be interesting to see. Then at the cornerback position, some big names that they talked to formally: Jahdae Barron out of Texas, Will Johnson out of Michigan, and Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame are all players that are expected to go on day 1 or at the very latest round 2. And then they also talked with Zy Alexander, Jacob Parrish, and Upton Stout informally at the Combine as well. Now, I think what the Steelers are going to do is they're going to address corner in free agency. Now, what the big question is, how many corners do they get in free agency? Because I think they're for sure going to get one, but the question is, do they double dip? And I think that there's a decent possibility that they do. There's quite a few good slot corners in this year's free agency class, as well as outside corners that are available for decent price tags, or at least I think they will be. So I think the Steelers will be very aggressive to really round out the rest of this cornerback room for 2025, because this was really the biggest weakness for this team down the stretch, with Cam Sutton and Dante Jackson really struggling. Then we get to the safety position. Xavier Watts and Jalen Reed from Penn State were the only 2 formal meetings at the position. Love Watts' game, by the way. And then R.J. Mickens and Malik Verdon also got informal meetings. But it certainly looks like the Steelers are probably pretty good at safety as well. They might add like a third safety, like a Terrell Edmonds type, to come in there and kind of be almost like a hybrid linebacker. We know Mike Tomlin likes to go to that 3 safety look. So I do think they'll add somebody at this position. But I'm not sure if it's a big-time priority for this team moving forward. So the 3 positions, based on the behavior that the Steelers had here and the players that they talked to, it's pretty clear that these are the 3 positions that they are targeting early in the NFL draft this year. Defensive line, specifically interior defensive line, wide receiver, and running back. Of course, the Steelers only have 3 picks in the first 3 rounds. So at this point in time, I would expect the first 3 picks to be these 3 positions, all right? Like, maybe corner gets in there because maybe they feel like they can get a running back early day 3. We'll see what ends up happening here, but these are the 3 positions that I think the Steelers are really honing in on, and I would be pretty surprised. I mean, maybe they could take Jahdae Barron in round 1 if they really want a nickel corner, but I would be pretty surprised at this point if it's not one of these 3 positions in round 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So do it for me right now down there in the comment section. Finish up today's show by ranking Pittsburgh's needs in the comment section. The biggest needs that they have: defensive line, wide receiver, running back. Rank them for me down there in the comment section and share your take with us. Make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, guys, we are going live on this channel, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, to talk more Steelers football with you guys. So don't forget, click that subscribe button and join us later this evening.